Now then, I'm just going to cover some details about using the Myenergi Eddi diverter as a secondary diverter. So I don't want this intro to last forever, so we'll go quickly to some drawings. Okay, let's do what they used to say called chalk and talk. So imagine we have a solar array with 8 panels on it. Yeah, and that's attached through the DC to a grid inverter. So once you put AC grid power into there, then when it's sunny, power will go that way. Now that's 8 panels, 2 kilowatt. When it's bright sunshine, you'll get 2 kilowatt. When it's grey and horrible, you won't. You might only get 200 or 300 watts or of that nature, anything varying from nothing to the 2 kilowatt. So you just got to bear that in mind. So now this, the power, let's draw a house. Okay, the power goes into the power system of the house. Fair enough. So if you've got an immersion heater here, on a bright sunny day, when you want to run that, you will at the minimum be pulling 1 kilowatt from the grid, because you're only going to get 2 kilowatts from the solar. And on a middling day, you might be drawing 2 kilowatt from the grid for a shortish amount of time, like a couple of hours. However, if you put a diverter, and I'll draw it on the outside of the house for ease, then the power comes from your fuse board, which is there, to the diverter, and then the output 1 of the diverter goes to the immersion heater, and the sensor that goes with the diverter senses when export's going to happen, and it puts power into the immersion heater, only up to 3 kilowatt per channel, and it'll only run 1 channel at a time. It won't run both channels together. Okay, modern diverters have 2 channels, so when the first channel's up to temperature, it diverts the power to the second channel. Fair enough. So if you've got 800 watts coming out of your grid inverter from the panels, because it's a middling day, then it just takes longer to heat the water up, but you still get a tank full of hot water without importing any power from the grid. So in the winter, 8 panels will give you a bit of power, but you've probably got the boiler or the wood stove running at the same time, so you've got plenty of hot water. However, spring and autumn, you know, it's sort of on the edge, so you may decide to add some more panels, second-hand panels with a second-hand grid inverter, that sort of thing. So we'll add 8 panels there and another 8 panels. This is just a for instance, perhaps, maybe, with an inverter for each of them, and the power goes to the house. So now in spring and autumn, you've got plenty of power. You've got maybe, say for instance, 3 times 500 watts. Even though they are 2 kilowatt arrays, the light's not there, the sun's not strong enough, whatever. But in summer, then you've got potentially 6 kilowatt. Right? So you can, to prevent loads of export, you could add another diverter. Yeah, with, let me just draw, that's another load. Yeah, that's L1 and L2. And then you could have another diverter with L1 and L2. What it means is, and you'll see in the video shortly, that the primary diverter, which in the case of the video is an early version of the Myenergi Eddi, that we are using as the secondary diverter. Okay, so in spring you can get really sunny days, but effectively they're quite short. So you can get a lot of power, but for not as long as in summer. Effectively, if you've got a huge water tank or a buffer tank connected to solar thermal and a wood stove, but somewhere where you have 1 or 2 immersion heaters, channel 1 of the primary diverter can go to the top immersion heater, and channel 1 of the secondary diverter can go to the bottom immersion heater. That way, when the sun shines brightly for maybe 1 or 2 hours, you get a lot of heat dumped. That one will do 3 kilowatts, that will do a maximum of 3 kilowatts. So in the video, as I've said, that is the forerunner of the Eddi. That's the primary and that's the secondary. Hopefully that sort of makes some sense. So now the video that follows, it was quite difficult. We've got 3 or 4 variables all running at once. We've got the varying sun intensity because it's got scudding clouds. We've got 2 diverters, 2 cameras, 2 different loads. It's all doing all sorts of things, but I've edited it down to as much as I can so you can get the idea. But effectively what you will see is the light intensity coming up. Diverter 1 comes up to maximum load and starts to export extra power. Diverter 2 takes some of the extra power, and you'll see at one point that both of these are on full load because diverter 1 is on channel 2, which is a storage heater, and diverter 2, even though it shows a hot water cylinder in the on the screen, it's actually a resistance load of 2.2 kilowatts or 2.1 kilowatts in the office. So it can be a little bit confusing, but as you'll see in the video, and then at the end of that demonstration clip, I'm showing you how to set up the Myenergi Eddi diverter as a secondary diverter, and the software in the Myenergi is perfect for this scenario. Okay, here we go. This is the early Eddi, and as you can see, we've got 1 kilowatt going to the second channel. So the hot water tank is hot now. Can you see now that output's going up to 2.1? And if we look at the Eddi, then at some point, as that output goes beyond the 2.2 kilowatts for that heater, then the Eddi will start diverting the extra. A little bit tricky. We've got scudding clouds today. We just got the sun coming out. We're up to 2.2, and now the Eddi is diverting into its load. And if the sun goes in, we should see the Eddi switch off and the Mark 1 taking the full load. So now we've got 2.1 kilowatt going into the heater on Eddi Mark 1 and 2.1 kilowatt going into the heater on Eddi 2 and 1.89 kilowatts going into the grid. And then when a cloud comes over, then Eddi Mark 2 will start to reduce its output. And there's a cloud, you see, and now the Eddi Mark 2 is reducing, whereas the Eddi Mark 1 is keeping its output. And now the sun's come out again, full brightness, and you see, there we go. Hopefully that makes sense. So the settings on this Eddi Mark 2, press the menu, into advanced, and then the code is 0000 unless you've done otherwise, which I suggest you don't. Then we want to go into supply grid and then down, and we've got export margin, export threshold and response delay. So we've got the export margin set at 100 watts, so therefore Eddi Mark 1 has to export 100 watts before Eddi Mark 2 starts to divert. And we've got a 4-second delay just to make sure nobody gets confused. So export margin is you export 100 watts, and when you start diverting you still export 100 watts. Export threshold is whatever you set it at, say 100 watts, but then when you start to divert, it diverts the whole amount including that 100 watts. So this seems to work quite well. It piggybacks, as we've seen, on the Eddi Mark 1. So now if you have more generation than you can divert, a secondary diverter helps. It means that you're not exporting too much power, and it means that you can have a slightly larger solar array or several solar arrays, so that when we've got grey skies or low sun, we're still getting plenty of power. It's just when there's really full sun that you need to be able to cap the output into the grid. So there you go, grid diverters. Very useful bits of kit. It's a way of compressing your power from your solar panels into heat. And of course, in the example there, we were talking about exporting 6 kilowatt. But if the fridge comes on, the freezer comes on, you switch the kettle on, then the export goes down by the appropriate amount. So it's only the power that you would otherwise be pouring into the grid. And to some extent, yes, put power into the grid because it reduces generation elsewhere. But if you're effectively stopping the power going into the grid and putting it into heat, which you will use later, then you're preventing import of power later on in the day, which you're reducing your needs on the grid. So all you've got to remember is it's a way of compressing your generation and saving power, even if you've only got a grid system without batteries. Hopefully it makes sense. I'm going to do other videos about this scenario, but there are one or two other ones, and I'll put links to those in the appropriate places. Catch up with you soon.